Knights and Castles, Chapter 7, Armor. As part of his dubbing ceremony, a new knight was often given a suit of armor. Armor is metal covering that protected a knight from his enemy's weapons. Armor was heavy and it was hot. It was hard to put on and take off, but it was the best protection a knight could have when he went into battle. The earliest armor was made of small metal rings all linked together. The linked rings were called mail. Mail was first popular in the 11th century. This kind of armor is often called chainmail because the rings are linked like a chain. Knights going into battle wore a mail coat called a hauberk. A hauberk was good protection against the sharp edges of a sword, but a knight could be stabbed through mail rings with a thin dagger. He could also be shot with an arrow or have his bones smashed with a heavy club. A dagger is a short-pointed weapon. Hauberks were so heavy that knights who wore them had to wear padded underwear. To better protect themselves, some knights started strapping steel plates over their mail armor. Steel plates were much better protection than mail rings. By the 1400s, most knights no longer wore mail at all. Instead, they wore steel plate armor that covered them from head to toe. Here, you can see an image of a knight. You can see the mail, which is the chain link, at the shoulders and down below, underneath the steel plate armor. Helmets. One of the most important pieces of a knight's armor was his helmet. Now, like all armor, helmets changed over time. The earliest helmets were simply steel hats with nose guards. Later, helmets looked like upside-down buckets with eye holes. They were called helms. In the 14th century, knights began wearing helmets called bassinets. Bassinets fit more closely around the knight's head. Most had visors that could move up and down. That way, the knight could see better when he wasn't fighting. Tournament helmets were sometimes very fancy and heavy. Some tournament helmets weighed over 40 pounds. A suit of armor. Now, there were so many pieces in a full suit of steel armor that it could take over an hour for a knight to get dressed. Knights in full armor even wore steel gloves and steel shoes. Horses wore armor too. A horse's armor was called a bard. Here you can see an illustration of a knight and his horse wearing all of their armor. Jack and Annie present the story of heraldry. Helmets hid knights' faces, so knights wore big badges to tell each other apart on the battlefield. The badges were called coat of arms. The first knights could choose anything they wanted for their coat of arms. A knight might pick a lion to show bravery, or a tree to show his strength. Eventually, though, there weren't enough pictures to go around. Annie the oak, Jack the owl, Annie the sun, Jack the sun, Annie the bluebird, Jack the jaguar. Strict rules were made about who could use which pictures. There were also rules about how the pictures could be drawn. The person who checked to make sure the rules were being followed was called a herald. The whole system of coat of arms is called heraldry. And here we see an illustration, the Battle of Poitiers.